This video is for lesson 1 of the light topic entitled Light. By the end of the lesson you should be able to recall what is meant by a luminous and a non-luminous object, understand what could happen to light when it encounters an object, and understand the meaning of the terms transparent, translucent and opaque. How we see things. We see things because light does one of two things. Firstly, light can either come directly from an object into our eyes. So if you consider the situation here, we've got a person and light coming from the sun. The light's going directly into that person's eyes so they can see the sun. Or you can see an object such as this little bit of homework here where light comes from a light source such as the sun, hits that object and then reflects into the person's eyes. Now, as ever, this little red bit up here means that you need to have this written down into your notes. So do your best with a diagram. Okay, so pause the video now and make sure that you've got that down into your exercise books. Luminous and non-luminous objects. This slide also needs to be in your notes. We talked a few moments ago about how we can see objects, and we said we could see the sun because light comes from the sun directly into our eyes. Well, because the sun gives off its own light, it is classed as what we call a luminous object. So luminous objects we can see because they produce their own light. The homework, however, doesn't produce its own light. It relies on light from somewhere else, another light source, hitting the homework and then reflecting into our eyes. So that is classed as a non-luminous object. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is underneath the two statements there in blue, I'd like you to write down a list of luminous objects and place them in a table here, and non-luminous objects or so-called reflectors here. So just pause the video, jot down 4, maybe 5 for each column then, and then I'll give you some examples. Pause the video now. Okay, so luminous objects could be a light bulb, a candle, stars, a lit match. Reflectors, well, most objects are in fact reflectors. They don't produce their own light, so a person would fall into that category. Table, bicycle reflectors, a mirror, and the moon. Remember, we see planets and moons by the reflected light of the sun. They are not luminous objects. Again, this slide needs to be printed off or copied into your notes, and it describes what happens when light falls upon an object. So this yellow ray here represents our beam of light. The turquoise block here represents our material. So you can see that one of 3 things can happen. The light can either pass straight through, and we say that it's been transmitted. The opposite of transmitted is to be absorbed, whereby no light gets through at all. And finally, the third thing that can happen, and we're going to look at that this next lesson, is that it can be reflected. It can bounce off the surface. One thing you should note is that when it's absorbed, any light that's absorbed actually goes up to heating the material a little bit. Okay, so again, can you pause the video and make sure that you've got that diagram into your notes? Okay, lastly for your notes today, we're going to look at the terminology which describes what happens when light hits an object. So passing light through objects then, the first thing we talked about is if a material allows the light to be transmitted through it, so if most of that light gets through it, we say that the object is transparent. So for examples, windows and clear plastic are all transparent materials. Translucent materials do transmit some light, but you can't see clearly through them. Some of the other light is scattered or absorbed in the material here, so it's kind of halfway house between being transparent and the third category being opaque. So opaque objects do not transmit light at all. So this person here appears black because the light from the sun behind him is all being absorbed, so no light passes through them. He's said to be opaque. So can you make sure that you've got a note of those 3 terms, please? You don't need the little pictures here unless you really want to. But make sure you've got those in your book and you understand those terms. Okay, so you should now be able to recall that objects that give off their own light are called luminous objects, and those which don't are called non-luminous or reflectors. You should understand that when light encounters an object, it can be transmitted, absorbed, or reflected, and you should be able to recall that an object which transmits light perfectly are called transparent objects. Objects which partially transmit light are called translucent, and objects that do not transmit light at all are called opaque.